Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adam Hancock and today I want to talk suburbs. And I have 4 points that I'd like to cover. And I think a lot of folks would probably take this kind of subject matter and go after specific cities. They'd say, don't move to Miami Gardens, the crime's bad, or etc. And I think that's cool and can be helpful. But Florida is a large state and there's a lot of things to look at. And a list of 4 or 5 individual cities, I don't know if it would give me enough context. I want to take a different take, and I want to talk about scenarios. I want to talk about ideas of suburban living and things that you can say in and out of trouble, but you could take my same topic and you could go across the different parts of the state and still have similar context. So I'll explain everything as we get into the video, but I hope you enjoy this style. If you do like the video and I can help you anyway within the Southwest Florida Gulf Coast real estate market, please consider reaching out. And without further ado, let's hop in. Okay, let's start with thought number 1, and I'm going to call this one anchoring potentially to the wrong city. Look, I get it. Everyone for sure has their own separate needs individually. But when it comes to picking one spot, access to the rest of the state, but you have to pick one homestead to come home to, what is really ideal? And I think in that conversation, like a Tampa Bay, for instance, would have a lot going for it. I think it's on the upward side of the trajectory. You still have a lot of room for growth and development. It's central proximity, but also on the coast. And if you take that in juxtaposition to like 2 of the other 4 big cities, Miami and Jacksonville. One, they're on polar opposites of the Atlantic coast. They're both in peacock fringe locations. And, like Miami, iconic for sure, and has very niche value, but it is pricey one. It's also kind of hard to get your head around because the 1% versus the not is a way bigger divide than some of the more blended locations. Jacksonville does offer perspective affordability. It's a really large city, or metroplex rather, but it's a choice. I mean, it's a real choice because if you go up here, you're up here. You're basically in southern Georgia. And then even Orlando, great for tourism. It offers a lot of suburbs, a lot of space, nature, affordability, but it's not on the coast. So when it comes to economy overall, when it comes to diversity of housing, 360 degrees of suburbs around a city, and then still a little bit of a room for growth, if you had to pick one, I think there's a clear kind of winner in that conversation. So if you're going to choose to live in a suburb around a city, picking a great suburb around the wrong city could be problematic. You could take this whole thing, as I digress, to smaller cities too. Like take what a Sarasota may be versus a Vero Beach or Navarre, Florida, or the Panhandle or something like that, where they're all lovely on their own outright. But we're talking here just economically, if you had to pick one, it's the central nature of them. It's what would have the most of what you need. And living in like a Lakewood Ranch or Welland Park or the eastern suburbs of Sarasota with access to Tampa and then down to Naples, the 2 major airports, I think it's really hard for these other places to really compete with that. So that's one thing when you're looking at your move to Florida that I'd really take seriously. Okay, my point number 2 is the idea of going maybe too far on the outskirts. So inherently, suburbs by nature, or at least the way that I describe them, even like these bedroom communities of some sort, are kind of already on the outskirts. Like you're making a conscious choice to not live in the city, to live around the city, so that you can get suburban things. You can get more house for your money, new construction, turnkey communal amenities, built-in schools, sports, all the kind of stuff that cities are cool, but they're historic. They're more like boroughs than they are, these typical neighborhood resort style stuff people are looking for. There's always that. But there's a line. So, a couple examples, right? So take Tampa Bay. You want to say, okay, I want the suburbs and I don't want to be that far from the working district. South Tampa, where the airport's at, downtown Tampa, that little strip of 4 exits. Well, one option that you can do is go east, old school suburbs. And there is a layer of Brandon, Riverview, Apollo Beach. But what you can also do is you can keep going. And you can go to Ruskin, Wamama, Sun City Center. Yes, definitely get a cost advantage by having a junior version of the main suburb. But is it too far? Does it get too in between? Too weird, both too far from Sarasota and Tampa and too far from the beach? I don't know. Another example, go north. One of the main sexy suburbs in Tampa Bay right now is Tampa Palms, Wesley Chapel, 18 to 22 miles one way from town. Well, you can do that, Tampa Palms, Wesley Chapel, Land O'Lakes, but you can also keep going. You can go to Zephyr Hills. Where does Zephyr Hills fall in that conversation? It's going to be cheaper than Wesley Chapel, but is it going to be too far? And then I'll give you one more, and then we'll finish this point, is same with Sarasota. You can take this to every single town. And I guess some of the line of what's too far is in the eye of the beholder, and it's really different for every town. It's something I think that like you can't you can't flippantly go into. Not that anyone does, but you really got to like understand all the options. So if you come down to the Sarasota area, just because it's so near and dear to my heart, I take Lakewood Ranch. Lakewood Ranch, the #1 multi-generational master plan in the United States. It's #2 overall across all master plans, just to the villages, and it sits northeast of downtown Sarasota. So the way I was growing up, none of that existed. The first house in Lakewood Ranch was built in 1995. University Town Center wasn't built yet when I left to go to college. So that entire thing's progressed really, really fast, and nothing was there. So how everybody remembers that is just being like farmland that like one family owned, basically. And so back in the day, and it's still kind of like an evolution of where most people's opinions have developed from, if you're in town, is that, okay, yeah, of course, if you go way out to the boonies, way out to State Road 70, yeah, you can call your shots. You can get new construction. It's cheaper, and that's the first neighborhood ever built. It's called Summerfield, which sits right on the State Road 70 Lakewood Ranch Boulevard line. But as it progressed, basically, a lot of the neighborhoods said about 12 miles, and over time, people were cool with it. But they weren't at the beginning. It was like the country in everyone's mind growing up, because everybody kind of lived in Palmer Ranch, the middle of town, like I-75. Most people lived west of it at the time because there's nothing east of it really, except for like the Mayaca big estate homes. And then it kind of trickles, right? So now where we stand, they have built a part of Lakewood Ranch that's like 8 to 12 miles one way to town. And then the middle is still that 12, 15 miles, and they've even gone up to like 20 miles. And so people are getting cooler because they have just a lot of like stuff to work with now. They could juxtapose things. They could say, yeah, I'll drive 30 minutes one way to the beach and I come home and I get all this. Well, the town that's the sister junior to that, or whatever you want to call it, is called Parrish. That one I still think sits in an interesting spot, because if most of Lakewood Ranch is 15 miles or under to the downtown and the beaches, which you have to consider if you're moving to Sarasota, because kind of what's the point? Well, Parrish is going to pretty significantly sit you about 10 miles further of the whole conversation. And it's building a lot of sister neighborhoods, a lot of things that look similar. So people already are trying to figure that stretch out. Lakewood Ranch to Parrish, especially upper Lakewood Ranch, the far part of Lakewood versus Parrish. Like, what is that step? Well, it's $675,000 median cost in Lakewood Ranch at any given time, and that might even be conservative based on how they record new construction. Well, Parrish is going to sit in the 410, 420. This is the difference between getting a pool and not. Getting 3,500 square feet versus 2,500, 4 bedrooms versus 3. It's significant, and because people are already cool with the Lakewood Ranch idea, because now we have 25 years in, Parrish is still viable for folks, just like Southern Venice is to Nokomis. However, you can keep going, and you can go to Ellington. You can go to the deeper parts of Palmetto. And so there's always going to be that in every single town. But the one thing to consider is that you will always save cost, and there's a reason for that, especially some of these bedroom communities. But these locations are never going to be where the one in front of it is. They're 100% always going to be limited, because Florida is about geography alone for the most part. We have a bunch of water and a bunch of things going on. It's a very skinny state, and everyone's hovering around that. The entire values of the towns have been based on how far you got from that. The more time goes on, not everybody can live, right next to Siesta Key, so they're going creeping. They were like 8 miles was far. Now they think 11 miles isn't that far. Now they think 15 miles isn't that far. But you get to 30, 40 miles one way, you get over an hour. That's not that much different than living in Orlando. It would just change the trajectory of all your decision making. So anyway, I think that's an interesting thing to consider, and it's something that will always come into play if you don't sit at a money doesn't matter price point. So that's number 2. All right, point number 3, I'm going to call buying too early in an up-and-coming suburb. So there are a myriad of different pieces of Florida that are being kind of hyped as the next big thing, or at least on an upward trajectory. If you take Parrish, we just talked about, we've heard a lot of rumblings about Northport because, it sits just east of Venice and Sarasota. Northern Fort Myers, like right under Cape Coral, with like the Estero and above Bonita general area, like just a few examples. They are exploding with new construction. There's a bunch of promises of all this stuff coming to the future, what these areas are going to be to the town. But the catch usually is, these places simply lack, communal downtowns. They lack things that make sense for all the building. They have schools that were already there, but not necessarily built for the incoming population. And we've seen problems like this with Waterside and Lakewood Ranch. They build this one little section that's some of the bougiest housing in this suburb, and they're busing kids over to Booker High School, which makes no sense at all in any way, locationally included, but it's a timing thing. And I think kind of the appeal of getting in in a place that's kind of on the up and up is really appealing, especially with the promises of future growth. But I think the one thing to really look at is if you were hoping to realize some of these day-to-day benefits in the next 2 to 3 years because you've seen the plans and you're like, it's got to happen, there's a bunch of new neighborhoods there, and you're not maybe prepared to wait the 5, 7, 10 years that a lot of these things end up taking. It's always way slower than anyone anticipates. And a lot of these, like, for lack of better words, these bedroom communities that aren't as master planned in the way where it's not a lack of new home neighborhoods, it's the lack of intentionality that they were planned together, then I think you might be disappointed. And the one alternative to that would be if you wanted to get in a suburb that does have that, that's more mature, a little bit more of a guarantee of what you see now is what you get, but it also has that room, then it might be worth looking and adjusting your housing criteria to go for location and community versus more space, call your shots in a place that might, when you get here, be anticlimactic. So that's number 3. All right, my fourth and final point, we're gonna make this a little bit more brevity-based video, is the idea of just getting weird with the purchase. Like, you could pick the right neighborhood, but if you buy the wrong property, it could be the right property for you maybe, but the wrong property in general, then it could be difficult to resell. Economically, it's going to be weird. And so what I mean by that is basically a couple examples. I love the idea of these villas, these not quite single family, but almost single family products they do in these Florida suburban neighborhoods. It's basically 2 single families that are narrow attached to each other. It's a lot of fee mitigation because they're usually on the lesser side of HOA fees based on size and shared maintenance with the roofs connected, all that kind of thing. But I loved them a lot when they were like $350,000, $400,000. But you start to get to the $700,000, $800,000 and you're not in a single family. That's going to be tough for the next person, even if you love the property, versus like saying, what's that versus a small single family, a 1,600 square foot villa versus an 1,800 square foot single family. I think you got to try to force your way into the single family if you can, with shades of gray. Another one is just over romanticizing. If you're not from a coastal state now, over romanticizing coastal proximity could put you in a situation that you're really just like, it's not worth it. If you're like, I want to get really close to the water, and you're like, and your price point puts you in like Western Bradenton, or you're trying to hug like Lido Key or something, you're going to end up in like a smaller historic house that's going to have all that kind of issues, and not going to really fit your criteria other than like just location, or you're going to end up in a condominium paying $2,000-$3,000 a month for fees alone, let alone assessment potential and these kind of things. So just your money's just going like maybe in the wrong area. Where if you just say, okay, I would define close, if you're in Sarasota, for instance, 7 to 12 miles. That's a great line. You get the best of the suburbs and you don't lose the coast. I mean, I think that's a really interesting way to go. And then lastly, just another random example. These are all very niche things that you could get into, or we could talk about it personally. But there's also neighborhoods where, if you get to the like $1.3, $1.5 million range, maybe don't buy the $1.5 million from certain builders. And this is again, this would have to be a custom conversation. But some of these guys that really fit great at like 600, 700, 800K with most of their products, they also build big stuff too, because why not? I think if you get in that range, you need to kind of step back and say, it's always that, what else can you do around town? What else should I do? What would the most biased people think? And you should be really just more aware of historically what's sold at those price ranges. Just because mid-level builders have gotten a little hairy over the last couple of years doesn't mean necessarily that's the smartest financial decision. So I'd be cognizant of that when you get into the nitty-gritty. Getting into a neighborhood, great. If the only way you can get in is an awkward version, then you might want to consider the B neighborhood with a better mix of housing criteria. All right, my friends, that is a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed my take. If you did, please consider subscribing to this channel here, the Florida Relocation Guide, if you haven't already done so. I'm going to try to hit every Wednesday, every Sunday, 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern for the balance of the year, and some sprinkled in shorter videos to do breaking news and that kind of stuff. Subscribing is just simply the best way to know what's coming, and some of this stuff does have a timing element to it that might be relevant to you. So if you're in the midst of research and you're not subscribed, then maybe consider doing so. Beyond that, again, low-hanging fruit-wise, I'm going to put all my contact information here. I have a full-scale real estate team. If this kind of content resonates with you and you're planning a trip down, you want to tour properties, you want to have a discussion, then the natural step is that. If you like this kind of style, I think you'll be even more pleasantly surprised by your experience with us, because we're just trying to kick that stone further down the road that videos like this are just kind of a little too high level to do at a custom level. We also, on my website, I'll put the URL down below, I have a free guide section. So right now we have a Lakewood Ranch, relocation guides, they're flip books. Lakewood Ranch, we have Bradenton, we have Sarasota, we have a best place across the state. Venice will be shortly, and I'm going to keep expanding that, but that's going to give you like very specific favorites list that's lifestyle and real estate related. That's a cool thing to do. One of the most helpful things, which you will naturally be on if you do download any of the guides randomly, I have a 30-day email. I send one email every 30 days, and it's like the best way to classify it is a manifesto. There's no pictures. It's just like blah, 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 all bullet points, and it's basically everything I worked on the previous 30 days, everything I'm thinking about, what I'm trying to figure out in the real estate market, possible incentives, new restaurant releases, new developments, got all that kind of thing. It's mainly all of Tampa Bay, all of Sarasota, Manatee, all of Naples, Fort Myers. I think that about covers it. Thank you guys for consuming any of my content. I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you on the next one.